All right, we're jumping in live for getting food safety into the budget for 2025. How are you doing, Larry?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Patty.
Good. Thanks for joining. And John is somewhere in the airs of Texas, and we will, wait to hear from him. He's flying on a plane, and that got delayed, so he'll jump on when he can.
Okay.
Great. Well, Larry, you've done these before, but would love for you to just jump in, maybe introduce yourself and why you work in the food industry.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I've been in the food industry for 25 years of my 40 years of, I guess, from being out of school and my career. And I've been with companies like Eckert Frozen Foods, which is a premier supplier of frozen peppers to major customers like Nestle, ConAgra, and so forth. And I've been with Diamond Foods, where I was in the nut business for many more than 10 years and involved primarily in the produce section of the grocery store. And, to put it simply, why am I and enjoy being in the food industry? It was never a dull moment. It was always changing. And I actually, putting it in perspective of your talk today, Patty, I mean, I witnessed a tremendous transformation in food safety over the 20 years that I've been in this industry.
Yeah, excited to dive in and hear how, food safety talks have changed, especially as it relates to budget over time. My name's Patty McNamara. I'm the founder at Alera, and I'm in the food space mostly because I have a severe food allergy. So just clued me into how food safety affects all of our lives, and just really want to, at Alera, we help companies get out of the tedious tasks of, going digital, supplier certifications, that sort of thing, to help them trend data. And that's what we do at Alera. And today we just want to help companies talk about whether it's something like Alera or any food safety initiative get in the budget. These talks, our goal is always to be something an expert can get out of, but then also if you're new to food safety quality earlier in your career, can learn from veterans like Larry and John, who will be joining us shortly. But yeah, the main goal today is just talking about food safety in the budget. Larry, before we jump in, do you want to give a brief intro on John in his absence? He's easy to brag about, but maybe give a rundown on him when he jumps in.
Well, John and I had a unique relationship. He was a high-level director in the food safety industry with Nestle Global. And he used to come to our plant, sometimes to do audits, sometimes to help us, sometimes to just find out what's going on. He was always welcome in our plant. He's one of the few people that I respect extremely highly because of his manner and the way he approaches food safety and the way he approaches it as a partnership overall. And a friendship grew out of it. And we spent about 3-4 years together when I was at Eckert and he was at Nestle. And that was back in 2015, 2018. And we've been friends ever since.
Love to hear it. A real supplier and buyer success story there.
I think, in retrospect and looking back at it, Patty, I think that's the way the industry has to go. It cannot be an adversarial relationship. And you're also talking about Eckert, which is a medium-sized firm, being a major supplier to the biggest food company in the world. And there's a lot to be learned there. And I think we had to be open-minded. We had to learn where we could. And it wasn't just food safety. It was general plant safety. And it was a true partnership, really, the last few years.
Great. Well, we're excited for John to join us when he hops off the plane in a couple minutes here. But as we're focused on getting food safety into the budget, Larry, give us a rundown. What's been your experience with budgeting for companies as a whole in the past, and then as it relates to food safety?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Patty. I'm going to start a little bit, talk about how food safety has evolved. And, the way I see it now and the way I read about it in the journals and things like that is food companies now are in the business of managing risk. And it has gotten to the point where you are protecting your brand. You are protecting consumers. I mean, consumers want safe, healthy food, which is probably the first priority. And then, of course, your brand, your reputation, all the things that you work on through marketing your products and your company to build that product loyalty. And, for companies like Nestle, who are selling to the end user, they're building that brand of product loyalty of food safe food. And it starts right at the very top now. I mean, our mission statement at Eckert was we provide safe food. It was very simple, but it hit the nail on the head that food safety starts at the top. And to effectively get a proper food safety budget in place, it has to start at the top. It has to start with the CEO who sets the tone, sets the culture of the business going forward. And, one recall averages about 22% of a loss in sales. And that's, again, a financial statistic. But, if people get sick, if people become ill because of your products, that's devastating to the people who work in the company, and they work so hard to provide safe food. And it's also devastating to the company itself in terms of brand and product loyalty. So I think, getting it into the budget, CEOs have to include food safety in the mission statement. It has to start from the top and work its way down. You have to create a positive food safety culture. And I was thinking about this a little bit. I got a few more points, but I was thinking about this as I was working through this, and I almost think, I'm probably there, to be honest. Your food safety budget is nearly important as your marketing budget. It's no longer a cost center. Is it a revenue?
Yeah.
Maybe not, but it's certainly a revenue loserator, if you will. If things go awry. So
yeah, jumping in, Larry, really quick. I heard a CEO say recently that 95% of consumers, if they have a quality product problem with their food, they won't report it, and then 90% of them just won't buy your product again. So he was kind of talking about like, hey, you're working so hard to get these sales, but then if you're losing them on the quality side, like what's the point in getting them in the first place?
right, and consumers are very attuned now to food safety. I know people, and my wife being one of them, who knows how to navigate the FDA website on food safety recalls. Only a select few where you have possibly illness and death get broadcast over the media. There are many, many more that are on that FDA website for many, many reasons, mostly for mislabeling.
Yeah.
But, going back to the CEO, creating that positive food safety culture that people can work in, putting it on an equal plane of marketing, sales, is very, very important to help building that budget, to understanding that budget. And John would love to make the point that food safety people need to understand how they fit into the organization and the importance that they have to the organization. And that's on the CEO to start to build that culture.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have qualified people. And then to our discussion the other day that we had with John, I mean, understanding that food safety people are generally technicians. They're not salespeople, and they're generally not financial people. So getting that proper budget, getting the money available for programs that are going to help minimize that risk. And of course, you can overdo it, right? I mean, you can go beyond, but getting the maximum minimization of risk is what you're looking for. And the CEO has got to work with his food safety people, knowing that they're generally technicians, not necessarily financial people, and help pull those programs through and helping food safety people understand that we're minimizing risk, we're managing risk, and what is going to help us maximize our risk management. Um, Pay attention to data. We've had discussions on data many times before. The more data you can collect on your environmentals, on your programs that manage the risk, the better. The CEO can no longer sit in that front office and just hope everything is okay. They got to be involved. They got to
Yeah.
look results. And sometimes people, the old saying that when you're in the trees, it's hard to see the forest. So sometimes you have to be that person that can say, hey, have we looked at the data this way? What is it really telling us? Do we have a problem brewing? Or are we doing something really good that's working that we need to recognize, either keeping the budget, enhancing the budget, something like that. So data is extremely important. And then, of course, CEOs, I think today have to stay current with regulations. They have to know about BRC. They have to know all these different regulations that come in from FDA, FSMA, and all that on a very working knowledge level. It can't be, again, my QA department will handle that. If you don't know what consumers are expecting, if you don't know what the regulations are expecting, then you are not an effective CEO in the food safety arena.
Yeah. And Larry, I think there's a lot of food safety quality people probably listening that are like, man, Larry sounds like a great CEO to work for. You got food safety in the mission statement. You're saying it's as important as marketing. I think we all know that's probably a little rare in reality. What are the reasons that food safety doesn't get in the budget? I can tell just from my experience that the first question when we meet with the CEO, VP of operations, or CFO, they're always going to say, well, how much does it cost? Or, this is just food safety is just asking to spend more money. So what do you see as the reasons that food safety doesn't get in the budget?
Well, it depends on how you look at why it doesn't get in the budget. There are food safety programs that might be redundant. At the end of the day, it's a nice to do, but it doesn't add to that management of risk. For example, you're running certain, John would know this, maybe explain this a little bit better, but you're running lots per day. It could be, your lot could be 4 hours, it could be 1 hour, it could be 8 hours, and you're running X amount of pounds. And you're doing your pathogen testing. And there's a certain amount of testing you can do that gives you 99% confidence level of effectiveness for that testing. Beyond that, you're redundant. And I think CEOs have that responsibility to ferret that out so that you are effective, not redundant. I think there's, I know going through the 20 years, a lot of, and it was a nice compliment about I'm a good CEO or a nice CEO because I really find food safety. And you were the one who laid out the question, why do CEOs lose sleep over food safety? We talked about that. In reality, the going through the 20 years in food safety, watching that development, there's a lot of people that kept their head in the sand for a long time in terms of CEOs and things like that. I guess I was always one of those that wanted to avoid that recall, wanted to do the right thing. And a lot of food safety is doing the right thing when nobody is looking. Are you people doing the right thing when nobody's looking? Are your managers, supervisors, and your food safety leader doing the right thing when nobody's looking? So I think sometimes it doesn't get in, because originally, and I think this tide has certainly changed, but people didn't want to address it, didn't want to have to learn about it. It was a cost center department. You guys take care of it. And I think it probably exists today to some extent. But I think major food companies, successful food companies, long-term successful food companies, believe in food safety at a very high level. And then I think, and John raised this issue, and I agree with him on this. And that's why I made it one of my points is, a CEO must understand the people and their capabilities that he has in terms of being able to talk to financial justifications, make sure they understand where they fit in the organization. They're managing risk. They're not putting forward redundant type things. And the CEO has to pay special attention to that so that all that communication stays open and is clearly done. And good feedback is given afterwards when a program doesn't make it. Why? Why doesn't it fit? And then it all flows down to getting management risk correct at the highest level without being redundant. I think food safety leadership is developing still to be able to talk about that, not fear monger. Some we're going to have a recall. We're going to have a recall. I mean, that doesn't do any good for the organization. Understanding what needs to be done, what are the basics, and doing those right every day, every run, every hour is what's critical to food safety. And I think, so you look at that, and I think, there are things that, like I said, are redundant that don't get in. There are sometimes problems with CEO understanding or leadership understanding. And then I think there's probably with some food safety leaders to commit fully and, try to get CEOs to understand why things are required.
Yeah, I think I like your point about some CEOs view things as redundant. I think that the difference between some QA managers and then some directors of quality. Also, are you getting any feedback, Larry, or is that just me?
No, I'm good. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep, can hear you. I was saying that some VPs of quality, the CEO says it's redundant, and it seems like the magic is getting the CEO to realize, hey, this can increase sales, this can cut costs, this can mitigate risk, and showing that really clearly. Mm-hmm. And I see that a lot of maybe more junior QA folks, they just pitch it, and it's like, hey, this is what it is, but they don't really tie it to, in a way, or sell it in a way that makes it seem not redundant to the costs that are already going there.
And the CEO's got to create that environment that, if the guy's got 10 ideas, the food safety leadership has 10 ideas that need to go into the budget to be able to put those on the table so they can be discussed at maximum length. That's got to be created from the CEO. The worst thing I used to really bother me a lot is when an auditor or a food safety guy like John would come to me and say, your food safety guy said this. And right then and there, it was clear to me that communication was breaking down, and we needed to fix that line of communication so that we're all on the same length.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you're right. It sounds like a lot of the feedback here is for some CEOs on treating the quality food safety teams a little better and getting them a seat at the table.
Yeah, make no mistake, Patty, the amount of money going into food safety, I don't have the data in front of me, but, recollecting what we went through at Eckert, that budget grew 3-4 times over a short period of time, 6-7 years. Big driver was just meeting all the regulations, and then refining to make sure that we were going to be able to run that organization's food safety program on a daily basis, doing it right all the time. Absolutely critical. I don't view myself as a CEO that favored food safety. I view myself as a CEO that protected food for the consumers and protected the brand that we had. And yes, it cost more money. And then we worked on, making sure redundant programs that didn't enhance our risk mitigation. We're not in the budget, but anything that helped us manage that risk, generally we paid for.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
for the group that's listening, the food safety people, that is when you get an understanding of that risk management and understanding the difference between adding or enhancing your management of that risk versus having a redundant program that doesn't help manage that risk is a key factor when you're talking to your CEO.
And what if they're talking to a company that the bottom line is they're hovering on profitable or not, or maybe they had a bad year? How do you sell food safety quality when the company might be losing money or struggling financially?
I think you need to look at where your money is going. I mean, fortunately I was not in that position to have to deal with that. But if I had to deal with that, I would probably look at where all my dollars were going. And I would look at basically, I would start with what are the minimum requirements for food safety for my regulations? What are my minimum requirements to keep the food safe for the consumer? I would probably work up from there.
Yeah, like
So,
hit the bare minimum.
yeah, I mean, you really, when a company is struggling, you have to look at your administrative costs, travel costs. I mean, some of the real basics of, what are we spending? What are we doing? Where are our dollars best allocated? The short-minded CEO might take money away from food safety, basically because if it opens up that liability, it opens up that risk to recall, could finish you off if you're teetering on the edge. I mean, a 22% reduction in sales for an average recall. I think the average recall is just short of $10 million affected on your business. Could be the difference of being a going concern and not being a going concern.
Yeah, or as John always likes to note, that your insurance rate's going to go way up once you have a recall too.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you'll just get dropped. So Larry, if you're running through it with a QA manager, how to get food safety into the budget, what is like your step-by-step approach?
My step-by-step approach and all of the budgeting that I did in my career was zero-based budgeting. Just because you spent it last year doesn't mean we're going to spend it this year. And basically, we would go through, on the food safety side, we would go through the programs that we have in place, what the costs of those programs are, and then what are the cost increases that we need to deal with. Labor was a big price driver on cost increases. Regulations, big increaser because of increased procedures, increased requirements, testing requirements, and so forth. Then you've got to recognize what all those things are, and you've got to ask yourself that honest questions: is, do I have to have this? Do I have to maintain this to protect the consumer's health, to protect my brand? A lot of money I saw flow away from. I shouldn't say flow away from manufacturing projects, because we had manufacturing projects that were there for food safety and enhancement of operations. So they work hand in hand if you can do it. But I would start basically with the zero base. I would start with the cost of my current program and what needs to stay in. And then we would start to entertain ideas as to, and they weren't necessarily cost cutting. Certainly, you're always looking at cost cutting. I won't lie about that. I enjoy cost cutting programs. Yeah, you always got to come back to that question. Is my food going to be safe if I do that? Am I going to increase my risk or am I going to lower my risk with this program? And that's, I mean, I'm simplifying it in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of detail that's reviewed in that discussion. We might be talking environmentals. We might be talking pathogen testing. We might be talking cleanliness and all kinds of things that go on in the food safety world.
Yeah, and I think something too is
one thing I don't want to gloss over is we probably would be talking a lot about training. I mean,
yeah.
training is a key factor, something that's very, very important to your food safety culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say too that I feel like a lot of people do a really good job. Some do a really good job of like when they want to get something in the budget, they align it with the company priorities. So if the
Mhm.
company priorities are, XYZ for this quarter, this year, how do you tie the initiatives, whether it's, increasing the budget on training or, hiring that new QA supervisor, if you can tie it to the wider organization's goals, that always helps make room in the budget is something I see that people excel at.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to look at it. I always looked at it, particularly if sales were increasing. I looked at it as an opportunity to hold cost as best as I could to increase profit margins. I mean, that's why we're in the business to a certain extent, and also to increase those profit margins to increase automation. Food companies have to automate. They have to get away from the labor component because labor components cost a lot of money, and labor components can be viewed as a weakness in your food safety program if you don't have a great food safety culture. Getting people to do the right thing on a daily basis when nobody's looking is a phenomenal feat.
Yeah. And how do you actually quantify that? Like let's use the example of training. Let's say we want to send our team of 10 QA techs to the world's best food safety training. How are you selling that to a CEO that says, hey, we want to increase profit margin this quarter? Yeah, what does that look like?
Well, there is a minimum annual investment that I would make in my food safety leadership. It would be expected for food safety leadership to attend a class on regulations, the newest, the latest, the greatest. And I also, in this close working relationship we had with Nestle, we would attend what John would call the Nestle College on food safety, simply to align with our biggest customer, simply to align with the largest food company's safety program, what they're doing and how they're keeping consumers safe. So there is a basic amount of training that I think is expected, and that's where you start. And then, we would talk about middle managers, supervisors. What are we going to do for training? Maybe set up a special training program. Maybe not every year, but 1 year, we're going to do something where we allow them to take something off-site and learn about food safety. Because remember, you're developing a culture. You are developing a chain of leadership. Leadership changes, and got to have people that are ready to step in, fill in when leadership is moving on or not available or out on leave or things like that. And then we always focused on training in terms of managers and supervisors, floor leads, things like that. And my predecessor at Eckert actually started this, and it worked very well. We had one big training session for everybody over 2-3 days. where we brought everybody in and we just talked food safety, talked about our own problems. We talked about fixes and things that we had to do better. So, I don't look at training necessarily as something that, whether you are a growing company, whether you're trying to shoot for a higher margin, there are things in food safety that just need to be done to protect that food, to protect that brand. And that's the way I went about it.
Yeah. I think some maybe playing devil's advocate, I feel like some CEOs might look at training and be like, okay, I can spend $60,000 to, send these techs there to get this training. Difficult to tie that to like actual profit margin or, saving money. Or it can be, hey, I'm going to put this $50,000 into the marketing budget or hire another salesperson. I think that's something that is a reality, is like everyone has a different standard of what's like the necessities for food safety. Food safety and quality is always going to have their opinion. The CO, VP of Ops is going to have a different thought.
Right. I think, in that regard, Patty, I think every project that a company works on with a pool of money, whether there's more money available that year, less money available, every project has to have some type of ROI. And if you've got make a decision between an operations project or a marketing project versus a food safety, I would question as to what is the standalone ROI if I put that money in marketing. What's the standalone ROI if I put that money into operations? And again, I would query the food safety leadership if there was more investment needed in food safety. What would be my additional mitigation of risk that we would be looking at versus a nice to do program and a redundant program. So in companies lean and mean, you don't do things necessarily as a nice program. I mean, you're there to make money. You're there to offer the best product available, the safest food available, and that's how I would look at that situation. I mean, I don't feel that giving operations a $15,000 or $100,000 amount of money for a project would be the right thing to do if I didn't get, in my world, in my food world, at least a 2 to 3 year payback, net present value type project.
Yeah.
We were very aggressive with projects, particularly with automation in the plant. And a lot of automation actually makes, in some ways, it makes plants safer, less people touching, less employees, where you have the potential risk of, beyond a certain pathogens passing through for whatever reason on the line. Brings its own set of problems to it in terms of keeping the machinery clean and things like that. But automation was a necessity.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What do you see, like, why doesn't everyone do these things? We had, I think, 170 people said they were going to show up to this. A lot usually watch it later when they're off the clock or listen driving home. Yeah, I mean, if people were getting food safety into the budget, no problem, I don't think anyone would be showing up. But why do you think, why doesn't everyone do some of the things we've talked about?
Well, I think to a certain extent, food safety leadership who feel that they're not getting their programs represented, they're not getting the money they need to run their food safety department, need to do, first of all, maybe do a little reflection, self-reflection, and say, am I aligning to the company values? Are my programs necessary to managing that risk? Is there redundancy in some of the programs that I'm asking money for? is there cost savings that you can help drive that program through with the CEO? And then I think there's probably still budget constraints. Some companies will say we're going to spend X amount on food safety and at the expense of managing that risk. I'm sure that still exists to a certain extent in the world today. I think it's less. I think less companies do that, but it does exist today still. So I think, the third might be, and the third might be the inability of a food safety leader to properly present a program. And then you have non-receptive CEOs today that don't set up that proper communication, that don't create that feeling in the boardroom of you can present your ideas to me without being ridiculed, without being tossed out. That we're going to look at all these, look at their effectiveness, and make a real decision on, whether we're going to invest that money or not. So
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you that it exists. I paint a rosy picture. Some of what we did it for survival. I mean, we were just, for some years, trying to keep up with everything, trying to provide that safe food. And when you started looking at some of these regulations, when you started listening to some of these companies like Nestle and what they were doing, there was a realization that we needed to be better, and we realized that, if we didn't do it better, we were going to be out of business in 5-10 years. It was that simple. So we chose to be proactive about it. I guess that's why I speak positively about it. And we invested a lot of money in it.
Yeah. And it sounds like too, you're saying where it really stems from is like how much are companies valuing quality food safety internally? Like John gave the example of while we talked last week of private equity firms will buy these food companies. They'll be like, hey, this facility is in rural Arkansas. We don't have to pay the same rate that we might pay somebody in Chicago or in a maybe wealthier area. And he was saying, well, no, it's how much value are you ascribing to this director of quality, director of food safety?
Right.
Like you should be paying to get the best because it's one of the most important roles.
Yeah, we talked about that a little earlier about the CEO's requirement. A must do for a CEO is to bring in qualified people into the organization. And, being by qualified, I don't mean just being a good technician, can run the programs, can get the paperwork done, can associate with auditors very well, get through audits and things like that. But, we're talking about food safety leaderships. When we talk about managers, supervisors, we're talking about good technicians. Moving to food safety leadership, understanding that you are a primary executive, you are a leader in that organization. That requires a certain amount of vision for your organization, for your department, in your food safety area. And it is critical to get the right people for those. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. As we're wrapping up here, Larry, do you have any real world examples from your career that jump to mind as far as, maybe something was worth the extra cent to pay for food safety or a food safety manager or someone you worked with that really painted the picture of why it's worth investing in? Any real world examples jump to mind?
When I went through it, Patty, um, like I said, I think 90% of what we were doing and growing in food safety was because we were keeping up and we were driving ahead of, trying not to stay ahead, but to stay in step with what the industry was doing, with what our big customers were doing, like ConAgra and so forth. And we had good relationships to do that. An actual program, I don't, I think we invested heavily in training, which was very worthwhile. in that area. And we invested in whatever technology there was in terms of pathogen testing, things like that, to really focus in on what I would call the critical control points of food safety. And that's where we put our money. I fail to get one specific example right now because there were so many. I mean, we went from 0 to 100 in a car in seconds. It moved that quickly, and it was moving that quickly when I was with Diamond Foods as well. I think when I looked at Diamond Foods and my area of produce, which started with just in-shell nuts, which was basically considered non-food, believe it or not, because you had to crack the shell to get to the nut to eat it. So our regulations were very small. Well, then we converted our plants to food grade plants. And we had to make all those conversions to stainless steel and all the things that we did to make sure we had the proper procedures in place. Those were huge investments that we made. Can't point to any one program and say it was more important or greater than anything that we did. We just implemented our programs on a grand scale. Very,
Yeah. And brought people in like John and others that would hold you to the best standards in the industry.
Absolutely, as well. And you also know Bill Bramer. Worked with Bill Bramer a long time on food safety. Brought him into one of my organizations, Superior Nut and Candy, when BRC and SQF were becoming real driving forces and trying to get ahead of all that. He brought, dog scratching at the door. I brought Bill in because of his expertise and experience, basically to get a foot up on what are we going to need to do. Because I recognized food safety is no longer a cost center. It was a competitive advantage. And to be one of the first BRC or SQF organizations out there was important, to give other companies and consumers that feeling that we were a food safe company was important, build that brand and so forth. So sorry, I'm a little short on a real program. I'm sure John would be able to give you 20 examples.
Yeah.
But I think overall, we did so much in so little time. It was amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, John unfortunately is stuck on a landing somewhere in Austin, so waiting to get off the plane, so wasn't able to join. But yeah, Larry, I gotta ask, last question. You mentioned it when we talked last week. Does food safety really keep CEOs up at night?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think the best way to explain it is it's a risk management program. And we've just had 2 recent recalls that are the opposite ends of the spectrum. You had the Boar's Head recall, where clearly there were some problems in the plant where these products originated. 97% of recalls are man-made problems. And Boar's Head is maybe like PCA. I don't know on the grand scale how bad it will be eventually, but there was negligence. People overlooked things and produced bad food. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got, and this is the one that scares you as a CEO, you've got a McDonald's recall on quarter pounders. And they're looking now at Taylor Farms onions that possibly could be the problem. And 2 good organizations, Taylor Farms learned a little bit the hard way, but has become a premier organization. Make no doubt about it that McDonald's has very high standards for their food. Taylor Farms had to meet those standards to get it done, and yet you still have a problem. It's risk mitigation. It's not complete avoidance. You try to do that. Frank, is it Giannis?
Giannis.
Going to Boar's Head now, said you've got to have a food safety program for avoidance. Stop it before it happens. But the reality is, in all your procedures and all your testing or statistical samples, And there is the 1% that can happen, and that keeps you awake, Patty.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Larry, so much for chatting today and
You bet.
for filling the time without John.
He owes
Yeah,
me.
really appreciate it. He does owe you one. And everyone here who gets food safety into the budget for 2025 owes you one. So
Thanks.
thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and feel free to follow up if you have any more questions. We will
Thanks,
wrap it
Patty.
up.
Are there any questions?
I